Okay, welcome to our Nestor podcast interview. I have now Usman Ibrahim Babagana from Nigeria, and we met at IPRES. That's too much to say. We haven't really met, but I have seen him introduce his research at IPRES, last year's IPRES in Belgium. And that's why I invited him to our podcast to ask him a little bit more about his research. May I ask you first to introduce yourself, Ibrahim?
All right, thank you very much for having me, Yvonne. Like you rightly pointed out, I'm Usman Ibrahim Babagana, and I am a research fellow at the Center for the Study and Promotion of Cultural Sustainability in the University of Maiduguri, promoting cultures in West Africa. We have an MOU with University of Hildesheim in Germany and University of Cape Coast in Ghana. So I am also a scholarship holder. I did my master's under the DAAD funded scholarship in collaboration with the University of Hildesheim, and I'm currently doing my PhD while also working as a research fellow at the Center for the Study and Promotion of Cultural Sustainability, University of Maiduguri. The center was created in 2016 as a result of it was created because of the insurgency in the northeastern part of Nigeria. It was a response towards the insurgency in order to sustain cultures amidst the conflict. Thank you.
And is it the Ramat Library which is collecting all the research you are doing?
Actually, how it works is that whenever there is a research that has to do with your maybe like your master's thesis or your PhD dissertation or your bachelor's, usually a copy of the research is usually sent to the Ramat Library. For the BSc or the let me say the bachelor's, you have just the hard copy, a full hard copy of your research sent to the Ramat Library. Another copy is sent to the department, another copy is sent to the faculty, and so on. For the MA or the MSc or PhD, that's the postgraduate. For postgraduate research, the Ramat Library also holds a copy. In addition, there is a digital copy in like a flash drive or in a CD plate uh, attached to the hard copy. So that is the role Ramat Library plays in housing your research. But when it comes to maybe your research that has to do personal research that has to do with articles or conference presentations, there is really no link. It's just wherever you publish it, that's where it stays. So you are only obliged to send your research when it has to do with your postgraduate studies and your bachelor's. So that's the system. That's how it works, and it's one of the things we are trying to it's a gap we are trying to fill in because it detaches researchers from the library. So we are trying to bridge that gap and also bridge the gap between researchers and the host communities. So we are trying to bring like a fusion or a marriage, so that it will be made more effective. In fact, it's one of the motivations for conducting this research.
Yeah, I see. As I've already mentioned, I heard your presentation at IPRES on
Yeah.
the big stage even, and you had the opportunity to introduce your research to a new audience, the IPRES audience. Was this IPRES your first IPRES or your second time?
Okay. Actually, that was my first ever iPress presentation. In fact, it is not only my first iPress presentation. It is my first ever presentation outside Africa in Europe, physically. Yeah, that was the first.
Physically, but you had some presentations virtually before that?
Yes, yes. I've been engaged in one or two presentations group presentations, like lecture series on cultural sustainability. We've been engaged in that like virtually a lot of times because it's part of the requirements of the PhD. Yes, so we usually do that, and sometimes we do colloquiums online where we interface with students from Germany, students from all other parts of Europe. So we usually do presentations online, but physical conference presentation, the iPress was the first. Yeah, it was a new experience actually.
And how was that experience for you? How was it? Did you like it?
Oh, actually, I enjoyed it. I really liked it. I gained a lot of knowledge because sometimes while I got to understand that while attending conferences, when I was preparing for my presentation, but I learned even more from the informal interactions with conference participants. I met new friends. We met with people who had interest in one or two things that we are doing, and wanted to see how we can network and then you know probably do something in the future. So it was a really great experience. I liked everything, and in fact, some people have also um, opened their doors to offer help and guide whenever we need to, or whenever the need arises. So I think that's a lot. It's one of the differences with virtual presentation. When you meet with people physically, you interact, the connection, it's quite different from the virtual presentation. So it's a whole new experience, and it's something that I'm looking forward to again. It reignites this burning passion and desire to attend more conferences, and you know yeah, in fact, it's a very good experience actually.
I strongly agree.
Yeah,
After the Corona years, the first iPress again, that was the second iPress for me after that. But yes,
yeah,
so I very strongly agree with you. And
yeah.
do you have the impression that now, if you stumble upon digital preservation problems, you know whom to ask?
Oh yes, yes, yes. I think it's one of the benefits of attending iPress. I now know, for instance, those that are top of digital preservation affairs. I know quite a few people. I got some of their contacts. In fact, even some of the participants who presented papers that had to do with digital preservation from the scratch, for instance, from the scratch, because we are just starting. And when I saw people who presented on digital preservation from the scratch, I was like, wow, I need to get the contacts of so and so persons because their experience is going to help me. And then those who have also been long in it will also offer another dimension to how I'm going to apply the knowledge. So I think when I need help on digital preservation, I know a few people to run to, based on my experience at the iPress conference. And before that, I didn't know like where to. Even though Gladys was, she actually introduced me to some of the tools, the digital preservation coalition random assessment model, the forward plan template. She introduced me, but it was a conversation online too. But when I came to iPress, I got a better understanding, which when I was discussing with her, she was like, oh yes, that's good. Even me did it. Even she herself was like, oh, I didn't know about this one. I was like, yeah, I met with people like William Kilbride, John Stokes. Is it Paul Stokes? Yeah, I think Paul Stokes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I met with very important people who were doing a lot of works in digital preservation. There are also bodies like the Archivum. Um, well, I have them written down. Yes, so I think I know where to go when I need help on digital preservation. Yeah.
We should maybe mention that Gladys is your colleague in your research, who's actually at the moment in Illinois.
Okay. Yes. Actually, Gladys, I got to know Gladys through a colleague who is also doing her masters at the Center for the Study and Promotion of Cultural Sustainability. She's also a scholarship beneficiary, the DAAD scholarship beneficiary. So she introduced me to Gladys, and when we connected and spoke with Gladys, I got to understand that she does a lot on indigenous knowledge preservation, and I was also someone who is quite interested in indigenous knowledge preservation as well. So we clicked and we started talking about how to preserve indigenous knowledge in a much more better way. And then we started talking. Then she introduced the Digital Preservation Coalition random assessment model, and it was, yeah, from there we applied, we did the paper together. I was here in Nigeria. The context of the paper actually is Nigeria, but because Gladys has also done similar works in Kenya on indigenous knowledge, and the context have quite similar. Yeah, there are some similarities in our context, so she understood the context as well, and then she offers her experience, and then we did the paper together. And then we applied, and then they accepted the paper, and then I was able to travel, but unfortunately, due to one or two, yeah, issues, the visa and everything, because Gladys she's in the US not too long, so for her to find her way back to Belgium, Kenya, the visa stuff and everything was quite difficult, so she couldn't make it. But I was able to get the visa and then the sponsorship. So yeah, so that was how the whole thing started.
And when I understood your research correctly, you are in charge not only for the digital preservation, but as well for the collection of the knowledge. So you have to acquire the content via interviewing the people who have the knowledge and then write it down yourself and then archive it
Yes.
as well digitally. Could you maybe give a broad description of your workflow?
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Actually, what the goal of the research from the onset was to practically show how indigenous knowledge will be preserved digitally, and then using indigenous knowledge on climate change as an example. In other words, collecting data on climate change adaptation from indigenous people in indigenous rural communities. This was the goal. But then we got to understand that there are limitations. My or let's say our goal was to come up with a template that will be applicable in the preservation of indigenous knowledge in other aspects of life, using climate change first. Then it will now be like a template that will be applicable to other aspects like music, health, dance, and so many other aspects. But then I got to understand that it was way more difficult than I anticipated, because I myself, I have a limitation, which is I am not very good in digitizing or digital preservation. And now that boils down to your question: collecting the data, now documenting it in form of like writing it. The where I have a limitation, or where we have a limitation, is archiving, digitizing, and then making sure that it is accessible for as long as, you know, as long as we can access it. So that was where I got to understand that my assumptions were that the library would have these facilities to, help in the archiving. We have an archive unit in the university that works closely with the Ramat Library. So I assumed that we would be able to work with the archives, work with the libraries in digitizing, because I got an initial information that yes, it is feasible, it can be done. But after going to the field, after, conducting my interviews, few interviews, I got to realize that it is the structures, the facilities, the staff knowledge on digital preservation is not enough to actually further um, digitize the research. So the focus of the research changed, it switched. So what we are now advocating for is, firstly, we need to even have a digital preservation a policy first. We need to have a digital preservation policy. We need to have like a roadmap, and then we need to prioritize indigenous knowledge on climate change. And by so doing, we will bridge the gap that exists between researchers and rural communities where indigenous knowledge holders are, because there is a big disconnect between rural communities and the academia. So how do we bridge this gap? We need to now involve them, and the libraries will play a very great role, especially in respect to digitization. But we cannot achieve all of this if we don't even have a digital preservation policy first, if we don't have the skill, the knowledge, the staff strength, the manpower. If we don't have all these things, so how are we going to digitize? How are we going to preserve? Because the context is that of, there is conflict. You cannot predict what will happen tomorrow. There could be flood. So when some of these hard copies of research works, for instance, gets flooded away, how do you retrieve them? When these CD plates which you keep on shelves gets destroyed, how do you revive them? So these are the questions that we began to ask ourselves. So I went further to even speak with the head of the digital preservation unit of the Ramat Library, and because prior to iPress, I couldn't I couldn't meet him. I was only meeting other junior staff members of the library who were telling me, from their response I understood that they have no they have insufficient idea or knowledge about digital preservation. So when I got to meet the boss, and he also confirmed the same thing, but then he showed that there are efforts on the way to have a digital preservation policy. There are efforts in order to boost preservation or digitization of research works and so on. But till date, as I'm speaking to you right now, yeah, the situation is the same. It's the same. So these are some of the challenges. And using the digital preservation coalition random assessment model helped in even bringing out these problems more. It made it clear. It gave us a roadmap on, okay, where our problems are, where to address. Yeah.
So there are risks and dangers on at least 2 points when you are acquiring the knowledge from people who haven't written down anything yet, the indigenous people who have the knowledge, for example, about medicine or climate change, and when
Yes.
you have already collected and organized the knowledge, then you have to worry about the digital risks in the library itself.
Yes.
And do you have help in any of these things yet?
Okay, no, actually, this is this is something that is born out of passion. So it's something that I am actually doing alone. It's something that whenever I want to do it, I go with maybe colleagues who will volunteer or friends. Nec- they are not necessarily researchers or part of the academia, but sometimes I need them to help me translate because I'm not very good with the language, so I need people to assist me in translating. Uh, so I go usually with my friends in the community, like in my own present community, or one or two colleagues who work elsewhere in the university who are administrative staff members, not necessarily librarians. So basically, if it has to do with help, no, not really. The help has not really come from, let's say, officially help. No, no, no. So it's something that is like my own desire and my own passion to preserve indigenous knowledge. So it's something that I'm doing alone. It's not like part of my daily work in the office or something that I'm going to be assessed on. No, it's just out of okay, I want to do this. Yeah, it's just out of passion. Yeah.
And you and the Ramat Library are now responsible for which amount of information which is already digitized. Can you perhaps elaborate a bit which amount you're responsible for, or the library?
Okay, thank you very much. Presently, the Ramat Library has not gotten any information from my end. I have some of the information because I conducted the research. I did the data collection, and these information are mostly in text and audio, and these are just um text files, audio files from my personal phone recordings, and pictures from the interviews, the focus group discussions, and then the transcriptions of these interviews and focus group discussions. So basically, I would say they are raw information that are with me. Informations as to indigenous knowledge on climate change adaptation, indigenous knowledge as it relates to the indigenous community's perception and understanding of what climate change is and how they respond to, for instance, issues of extreme heat, extreme cold. What are the measures they put in place when there is an impending flood? How do they manage? How do they cope? For instance, like how do they adapt to the usage of clean energy? What is their knowledge on that? What do they use? These are some of the things which we've discussed, and I think I've gotten an in-depth understanding on how they perceive these things, how they also attach, spirituality into it,
Mm.
and I think there are some angles which also maybe goes in line with science, There are some of their adaptation measures which I think goes in line with science. Some of their indigenous knowledge on climate change, for instance, they have a particular diet which which is traditional, which they eat whenever it's cold. And as I was browsing, I saw a research which is empirical, which states that such diets are very good in preventing the body from catching diseases that are influenced by cold, extreme cold. And these are things which these people, they even have, for instance, again, special grasses which they plant during maybe heavy rainfall in order to control erosion. And now the the dangers the dangers of not digitizing or preserving indigenous knowledge. Now I am still looking for the name of these grasses till date. I
Oh,
was told, but for me to get the name is becoming difficult for me now, because they've been referring me and I've been searching. I've So now these are some of the dangers. So if we don't get to know these things in time, they will all fade away. What will be left will be the practice, the values, the indigenous knowledge behind these practices will be lost. And
mm,
we are trying to prevent that. Because whatever they do, I got to understand that whatever indigenous people, whatever they are doing, we are not saying they are perfect, but we need to have an understanding of what they do in order to know how to bring about improvement, or how to marry science and cultural traditions. So I got to understand that whatever they do have an underlying significance. It has a reason behind it. So mostly what people do, especially the present generation, what they do, even in the rural communities, what they do is they just do some of those things, but they have a very shallow understanding of the rationale behind it. The rationale behind it. For instance, people plant trees within their compounds. They plant trees within their compounds. But as an adaptation strategy, they also go to the forest to cut trees as firewood to cook. Now, I was curious and I had to ask, so why is it that you people plant trees in your compound in front of the house, but then you still go out to cut trees? Then I got to understand that they have this belief that looking at the green leaves of the trees improves the eyesight. So this these are things that are very new to me. Now this is a belief. I don't know how comes. Perhaps science will tell us one day. I don't know. But this was what I got to understand. And then as for cutting of the trees, there are so many factors responsible for that. But one of the factors that is culturally influenced is that they have special delicacies or foods which which they believe there are species of trees which must be used in cooking such foods. It gives the original taste. Or if they don't do it that way, they may not get what they want. And whenever they are having ceremonies like naming ceremonies, marriage ceremonies, they cannot cook with for instance the gas cookers. They can't cook with that. It will not contain the quantity that they want. And they believe it is a lot riskier to cook with the gas cookers, because of cases of fire outbreaks and so on and so forth. So they think it's much more riskier. But me, my in my own way of thinking, I was like, okay, from research, I think using the firewood, even the smoke that comes out, is detrimental to their health. But their own way of thinking is quite different. It is influenced by culture. They believe the children get stronger when they eat food that are naturally prepared by these firewoods. Now, it is one thing to get the data. It is another thing to make meanings out of it. Then what is the way forward? Because if we continue to allow people to cut down trees because of culture, there will come a time where getting the trees will be difficult. Deforestation, it will be difficult to get trees, and it will even have a lot of impact on climate change. So how
Mm.
do we go about these things? These are my interests. So we are not just collecting data and then preserving them. We also want to make meanings out of them and see how we can address these issues. If we go further as it relates to their farming culture, how they farm, the farming methods, how they plant, what kind of crops they plant. Nowadays we have short variety crops, genetically modified crops that can grow 2 3 times a year because they've been improved varieties. How have they been able to accept such ideas? Because we have a lot of humanitarian organizations, as I stated earlier, that are assisting these rural communities that have been affected by conflict with because most of them are farmers. They've been assisting them with short variety crops. But the problem is that when they give them these short variety crops to plant, these people come back to the urban settings and sell them and then go back to their traditional ways of farming. Now, these are matters of what they believe in. These are matters of culture, and they have their own line of thinking on why they are doing it that way.
Mm.
So how do we, solve the puzzle? So we need to now look at things from their own lens and find a solution, bridge that gap, so that gradually, it's a gradual process. It's not something that will be done within a day or a month or a year, but we need to start from somewhere. And these are issues of culture, issues of belief, what people believe in. It's very difficult to change it. But there are steps, there are approaches. Rural communities, especially here in the northern part of Nigeria, there is a structure, there is a hierarchy. For instance, the traditional leaders, the community leaders, these are very respected people. If, for example, you involve them in coming up with strategies to improve the livelihood of the people, if you involve them, don't you think it's going to lead to change to some extent? Compared to when you just come and then you deposit, you just make the assumption that they need this, then you just give them. They will just look at you and be like, okay, you can give and go. We will go and sell it. So these are some of the findings, and people have a lot of erroneous assumptions about rural communities. For instance, I also interviewed a lot of government officials who are working in the Ministry of Environment, and they were like, so many of them were like, the rural communities, they don't know anything about climate change. So how will they even accept what we are giving them? Because they don't know anything about it. So this is the assumption. But when you go there, when you speak to them, when you create time and speak with them, you will understand that they have their own understanding, they have their own perspective of what climate change is and how to adapt to these climate change in the community. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
So your job is far more complicated than just gather the knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and at the end of the workflow, when you have written down and have organized all the information and it shall be digitized and then preserved, how many or how do you do that? Do you have a hard disk or CDs or I don't know? How is it organized within Ramat Library?
Okay, like I stated earlier, basically it's just in its raw format. It's in text files like Microsoft Word documents, and
Hmm.
I try to save them in different places. And because my PhD research, there is the MOU with the University of Hildesheim, so I know all my data, or let me say some of my data that relates to my research, that's my PhD research thesis. Some of them will go to the University of Hildesheim. So
Hmm.
I'm sure those ones will be preserved. I know I have a far more a much more better technology. But the personal ones that I will be doing myself, I think because there's lack of funding, so I can only continue to send it to maybe my email, just keep them, that's. And I know if I had more funding, it would have been it would have been better than what I have done, because I would have gone with like maybe a very big camera, record all the sessions where we discuss and interact with these people, record the audio conversation, keep them in video as well. It would have been better. But sometimes these things are not um possible without these technologies. So I'm just doing it in the little way um, that I can. In fact, I was also advised at the iPress by a professor. She's from Australia. She also advised me that what I can do is preserve digitally by meeting these indigenous people, like giving each of them phones to record themselves, and then pass it to the other person, record it, pass it, record it, and then put it in a drive, like Google Drive and so on. That it's a small way to start, but then we can always refer back to them. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's the situation basically.
I see. So when have you started? So it's part of your PhD, and how long is it? When was your first interview?
Okay, I started my interview last year around, I think, before the iPress. That was like August.
Oh,
I
so
think around
really
August.
right before the IQS. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I've been doing it. In fact, I've been going to rural communities to do research and interact with these knowledge holders as far back as 2018, 2018,
Oh.
2019. Yeah, yeah, as far back as then. In fact, I've lost, so because I had some of this information in my other computer, which is bad now, and those information are there in the computer. So these are the things that
Mm.
hurts me sometimes when I think about not having a concrete digital preservation tool to always refer back to, even though even if we experience flood, if we experience drought or malfunction, we'll still be able to get refer back to them. So although then I was doing it just for fun, I it was later that I got to understand that these things that I'm doing, because whenever I sit in the midst of people and I begin to say, these are what people are saying in the rural communities, and for me, I usually assume that the people I'm interacting with, they know. I think these are common knowledge, which, and they'll be like, no, these things are new even to us here. And I was like, oh, really? So these things, they need to be preserved. They need, and when you speak with the rural communities, they tell you that we rarely get people come to us and discuss such things. And even when they do, they don't come back. We don't get the feedbacks. We don't see the
Mm.
product of the data we've given. So I try to establish contact. I try to always go back with, maybe Fridays we just make call and then exchange pleasantries. These are the relationships that we try to create and build, so that whenever you need something, already there is an established relationship. So the acceptance will be easier. Because sometimes you may go there, and because they don't really trust you, they just tell you what you want to hear and then you leave.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. It's like it happens. So, and that is one of the importance of ethnographic method of research. Staying with the community, establishing that bond, establishing that familiarization with them. So these are the things we try to do, and we try to maintain the relationship with them. Yeah.
And this is my last question about your research.
Okay.
What are the next steps for you? What are you planning right now?
Okay. Well, actually, the next step is is to try and come up with a digital preservation policy while prioritizing indigenous knowledge preservation. So, we presently I have like a digital preservation toolkit or a guide. I think it was sent to me by one of the iPress facilitators, William Kilbride.
Ah, yeah.
So yes, yes, he sent me a link where I would see guides on how to come up with a digital preservation policy that is relevant to our own context. So this is my next step. This is the next line of action, and I know it is something that I cannot do it alone. I need people who have that passion as well. Perhaps when we come up with something, we can now present it to the management, and then we move from there. So this is the way forward. Yeah.
That's cool. William, as a matter of fact, William and Sarah Middleton from DPC will be interviewed by us next month.
Wow, wow,
I know
that is
William since a very long time, and he's very helpful.
yeah, he is. We interacted a lot during the iPress conference. So he was very kind, and he was very interested in what we do and what we want to achieve. So he offered to help with the digital preservation. He gave me his email and said when I get back to Nigeria, I should remind him, and I did just that. And he fulfilled his promise. He sent me the digital preservation toolkit. So I was very happy about that. Even if that was the only thing I achieved at iPress, I think it was enough for me. Yes, yes. I am really happy about that. And then personally for myself, I also want to have the basic skill as it relates to digital preservation, because it's not enough to just have the passion and want to do all these things. I think that having the technical skill as well it will make it a lot more easier and better. And I think if I have that knowledge and skill, I'll be able to help myself and help the university and the community at large in a much better way. So I am looking forward to also finding a way to improve myself as it relates to my digital preservation skills. Yes, yes. So currently I'm doing my research, data analysis, so I'm overwhelmed, but I'm sure as soon as I finish it, that is my next, yeah, line of action. That is my point. Perhaps when I come to Germany, I will find a way to gain one or two things before coming back. Yes,
Yeah, that's cool.
yes.
So this is the end of the interview. I'm very glad it finally worked and the internet connection was okayish.
Okay,
So
great.
thank you for
Yeah, you're welcome.
answering all my questions, and I hope we will talk again, maybe with you and Gladys some other time, or maybe while
Okay.
you're in Germany, possibly. So let's keep contact
All right, no
and keep in
problem.
touch. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay.